Welcome to Dark Reddit, your late-night escape into eerie calm. I'm Alex, your voice in the dark and your guide through the unknown. This is Podcast 9, a shadowy chapter in our ever-growing collection of sleepless nights. Tonight's journey spans 60 minutes, a series of chilling tales whispered into your ears softly, slowly, designed to help your mind drift while the darkness unfolds around you. Before we begin, find a quiet, comfortable place to rest. Dim the lights, silence your world, and take one slow, steady breath. Now, close your eyes. Every story in tonight's episode is new, uncharted, untold, and unearthed from the darker corners of Reddit. Tales of strangers, shadows, and things that don't always stay in the past. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. You don't need to watch. You only need to listen. You're safe here. Now, let the night begin. I was a rookie cop when my older brother died. Suicide. He was one of my older siblings, but we were close. The kind of close where you don't talk every day, but there's a thread, a quiet loyalty that ties you together stronger than words. His death hit me harder than I let on. He was in another state, so I hadn't seen him in a while, and in hindsight, I beat myself up with questions. How did I not see it coming? Why didn't I check in more? The guilt was like a second skin. His remains were in bad shape by the time they found him. It was a closed coffin service. I flew back, stood by my family, tried to be strong, tried to keep my badge face on. But I felt like I'd failed in a way that ran deeper than law enforcement ever could. A week after the funeral, I was back on patrol. Nights in a rough part of town. My partner and I were cruising down a dim street known for its nightly offerings of vice and violence when we saw it happen. A pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. No hesitation. We hit the lights, jump out, and the guy bolts. I give chase. He's fast, lean, and he knows the area. He cuts through alleys, dodging trash bins and loose chain-link gates, then dives into a narrow corridor that tunnels under an old building. I follow without thinking, adrenaline drowning out caution. Gun in hand. Tunnel leads to a courtyard in the center of the complex. And right before I clear that corridor, just as I'm about to enter the open, I hear a voice. It's okay. But not just any voice. It was my brother's. Clear, calm, unmistakable. In that split second, everything slowed. My foot hit the courtyard gravel, and standing maybe 10 feet away, the suspect was crouched low, his back to the wall, pointing a pistol straight at my head. Before I could react, I saw the flash of metal. He squeezed the trigger once, then again. Click, click, no bang. I froze, not out of fear, but because something unnatural had just happened. My body hesitated, like it was trying to catch up with reality. Then instinct took over. I closed the distance and brought my revolver down hard across his skull. Again and again, until he was down and out. I cuffed him, sat there for a moment trying to get my breath, and eventually dragged him back toward the street to meet my partner, who was looping around the other side. "You good?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," I said, still panting. He tried to shoot me, pulled the trigger twice. We called it in, took the guy's .32 revolver. I told my partner about the gun, but not about the voice. That part one kept to myself. Back at the station, we unloaded the weapon. 6 bullets in the cylinder. 2 had clear strike marks on the primer caps. The hammer had fallen on them. I felt a chill start crawling up my spine. We sent the revolver and ammo to the lab for testing. A couple days later, I walked into the ballistics lab and asked the tech if he could do me a favor. I told him the story, everything but the voice again, just the part about the suspect pulling the trigger and nothing happening. He gave me a look. "Bad ammo maybe," he said, "but let's see." He took the 2 rounds with visible strike marks, loaded them into a test gun, and fired them into the tank. Bang, bang. Both rounds went off. Clean. No misfires. He looked at me, puzzled. "These rounds are good. Clean strikes. No reason they shouldn't have fired in the first place." I didn't say much. I just nodded, thanked him, and walked out. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I know what I heard. I know the sound of my brother's voice. It wasn't memory. It wasn't emotion. It wasn't me cracking under pressure or the echo of grief talking. It was real. Just 3 words. "It's okay." And I think it was him. I think he stopped those bullets. It's not something I say out loud. I mean, who's going to believe that? A ghost intervened in a shootout? Sounds like a made-for-TV movie. But that moment, in the middle of that courtyard, staring down the barrel of a gun, someone, gave me a second chance. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if those bullets fired like they should have. Best case? I'm wearing a badge and a coffin. Worst case? I don't go home at all. But they didn't fire, and I'm still here. I've had years to think about it since. I've seen a lot of things on the job, evil, pain, the thin threads people hang on to when the world goes dark. I've stood over bodies and behind yellow tape, questioned monsters and comforted mothers. But nothing has ever rattled me the way that moment did. There's a lot we don't understand about this world, and maybe that's okay. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained. Maybe they're meant to be felt, to be carried. Every once in a while, when I'm in a tough spot, whether it's on the job or just in life, I still hear it in the back of my mind. It's okay, and somehow I believe it. In my early 20s, I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto. It was a 3rd-floor walk-up in an old building, probably built before the 50s. Creaky stairs, warped hardwood floors, and the kind of smell that told you generations had passed through before you. Rent was cheap, and in a city like Toronto, that's usually all the convincing you need. I shared the place with a buddy of mine, Mike, and we thought we'd lucked out. It only took a few nights for things to get weird. One morning, Mike looked bleary-eyed at breakfast and said, "Dude, were you pacing all night? And what was with the banging on the wall between our rooms?" I blinked at him, still groggy myself. "What? I didn't do that. I went to bed around midnight. Slept like a rock." He gave me a sideways look, but shrugged it off. We figured maybe it was the neighbors. Old buildings carry noise weirdly, right? Pipes, floorboards, maybe even raccoons on the roof. We laughed about it and chalked it up to thin walls and overactive imaginations. But it kept happening. Almost every night, Mike would complain about pacing footsteps, banging on the shared wall, and occasionally whispering. Always late, always when he was alone in the dark. I didn't hear anything myself, so I stayed skeptical. Until things started happening to me. It began with the smell. Every so often, always at night, I'd catch this overwhelming stench in my bedroom. Cheap floral perfume mixed with a damp, moldy odor. Like someone had dumped a bottle of dollar store perfume on a pile of clothes that had sat in a basement near a litter box for weeks. It was nauseating and always came on suddenly, preceded by an intense, skin-prickling feeling of dread, like something was about to happen. The kind of feeling that freezes your thoughts and makes you hyper-aware of every shadow in the room. Then Mike bailed. 4 months into our 1-year lease, he packed up and left with barely a week's notice. Said he couldn't sleep anymore, that he felt like the walls were closing in. I didn't blame him, but it left me covering the full rent on a place I was increasingly nervous to be alone in. Out of desperation, and maybe a little curiosity, I moved into Mike's old room. It seemed quieter. Maybe the shift would help. Didn't. The first night I slept there, I had a nightmare so vivid I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. In the dream, I stood in our apartment bathroom, but it was dimly lit, like the bulbs were all dying. The mirror was shattered, but I could still see my reflection, and I was holding a large shard of glass, slowly, methodically slicing it down the side of my own face. I felt every inch of it. No panic, no screaming, just silence and the sound of glass scraping skin. I jolted awake in a cold sweat, breath ragged. My face was fine. The mirror was intact. But that dream, it lingered. It felt less like a dream and more like a memory I'd borrowed from someone else. That's when my share of disturbances began. Almost nightly, I'd hear loud bangs, not like creaks or groans from the old building. These were sharp, deliberate, like someone slamming a fist against a wall or door. The toilet would flush in the middle of the night when no one had used it. Worse, sometimes the bathtub faucet would turn on by itself. Full blast hot water, steaming up the bathroom before I even realized it was running. The knobs were old school metal and stiff, not the kind of thing that just slips from old plumbing. I checked everything, called the super. Nothing was leaking. Pipes were fine, of course. But the worst, the absolute worst, was the TV. It was about 2 a.m. I was fast asleep when I was suddenly jarred awake by loud static and screaming. My old analog TV had turned on by itself. This was one of those ancient sets, big, boxy, with 2 knobs, one to adjust volume and one to change the channel. You had to pull the power knob out to turn it on. No remote, no timer, no explanation. It was blaring. And the movie playing? Poltergeist. I sat up in bed, pulse racing, stomach in knots. The screen showed the infamous scene with the little girl pressing her hands against the flickering TV. They're here. I stared in disbelief, then dragged myself over and turned it off manually. It was like my worst childhood fear manifesting out of thin air. After that, I unplugged the TV every night before bed. I never found a concrete explanation for any of it. I tried bringing in a new roommate, but no one stayed longer than a month or 2. Eventually, I gave notice and moved out early. I never even bothered trying to get my deposit back. Years later, I tried to look up the building's history, but there was nothing online. No murders, no scandals. Just your run-of-the-mill, aging Toronto walk-up. But that apartment, it never felt like it wanted anyone there for long. Sometimes I wonder if there was something about me, about Mike too, that attracted whatever was there. If it was an echo of someone who had once lived and died in those walls, or if it was just something darker, tied to the place itself. But I'll never forget that smell, that nightmare, the sound of water running when no one was in the bathroom, or that voice, low and whispering just behind the wall, saying things I could never quite make out. Maybe it was just an old building, but to this day, every time I hear an old TV static or catch the faintest whiff of that sickly sweet perfume, something deep inside me coils tight. Some doors, once opened, don't quite close again. I lived in a haunted apartment once. It was a strange little setup, technically a 2-room unit, but one of the rooms was locked when I moved in. No key, no explanation, just a deadbolt and a solid, unyielding door. The landlord brushed it off as just a storage room, said not to worry about it. So I had to make do with the remaining space. One small room that served as kitchen, dining room, living room, and bedroom all in one, plus a screened-in porch that looked out over a back alley. From the beginning, the place had a weird feel, like the air was heavier somehow. Nothing dramatic, just a low, subtle sense of being watched. Like the walls remembered something I hadn't been around to witness, but I brushed it off. Old buildings always creak and groan. Atmosphere was part of the deal when you pay under market rate. There were 2 events, though, that really stuck with me. The first one happened when my girlfriend spent the night. She never liked the apartment, always said it made her skin crawl, but she stayed over now and then. That night, I woke up to her gripping my arm, wide-eyed, whispering urgently, "Did you see that?" Still half asleep, I asked what she meant. She pointed across the room. The bathroom door opened. I saw something, standing in there, a shadow, just watching me. The bathroom was right across from the locked room. From where we lay, you could see both doors, one locked, one cracked open. I sat up and looked, but of course, there was nothing there. I got up and checked every corner of the apartment, but it was empty. Still, she was visibly shaken. She wouldn't go back to sleep unless I sat up with her until morning. After that, she came around less and less. I didn't blame her. The second incident was more intrusive. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by the fire alarm going off, just blaring in that horrible, disorienting way they do. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline spiking, but I didn't smell smoke, didn't see anything burning. I ran to the alarm unit, and as soon as I reached to unplug it, it stopped. Dead silence. I opened the front door and peeked into the hallway. Not a single other alarm was going off, just mine. I checked with a neighbor the next day. She'd heard nothing. The whole building had been quiet. Now, a lot of the weirdness could have been explained away as noisy neighbors. I was never quick to jump to conclusions. But some things, well, they were strange even for that explanation. For example, I'd sometimes hear this rhythmic tapping, soft, metallic, like someone gently tapping a spoon on a counter. It would start at night, sometimes around 11, sometimes at 3 in the morning. Always the same tempo. I assumed it was coming from the downstairs apartment, but what kind of person just sits around tapping a spoon for hours on end? And why at that time of night? Other times I'd hear knocking. Not on the walls exactly, more like in them. It was spaced out, like someone moving slowly up the wall, tapping as they went, searching for a stud or something. You know that hollow to solid sound a knock makes when someone's trying to find where to hang a picture? Like that, but vertical. I never found a source. And then there was the moaning. It wasn't constant. Just now and then, I'd hear this low, guttural sound, halfway between a moan and a howl, echoing through the apartment at random hours. Sometimes I thought it was a dog, but it never seemed to come from anywhere specific. Not from outside, not from the neighboring units. Just this disembodied wail that rolled through the walls like fog. The apartment across from mine changed tenants 3 times in the single year I lived there. I never got close with any of them. But one girl left after only 2 months, and I overheard her telling a mover that she couldn't sleep in that place another night. Made me wonder what she'd seen. At some point, after living in that space long enough to feel its oddities settling around me like dust, I decided to give the ghost a name. I'd been getting mail addressed to a Peter J. Caro off and on previous tenant, I assumed. So I just started calling the ghost Pete. I told myself it was a coping mechanism. It gave the whole situation a weird kind of levity. Like I was living with an eccentric roommate I never actually saw. If something creaked, I'd say, "Cut it out, Pete." If I heard tapping, I'd sigh and say, "Okay, Pete, you win. You're louder than me." It started to feel like a game. I even left a sheet of paper on the counter titled Pete's Notes with a pen beside it. I told him, "If you've got complaints, just jot them down. I'll do my best." It sounds ridiculous, but honestly, after I started doing that, the place felt a little less heavy. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, like we had an agreement. My girlfriend thought I was nuts and eventually stopped coming over altogether. She said she'd never felt truly comfortable in the apartment, and even my jokes about Pete couldn't make it better for her. I started spending more time away myself, crashing at friends' places or staying out late. Still, I lasted the full lease, and when I finally moved out, I left a note taped to the inside of a cupboard. "Dear Pete, thanks for the weird memories. Take it easy on the next tenant." Asterisk. Sometimes I still think about that place. The locked room, the spoon tapping, the fire alarm that stopped the moment I touched it. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I've always leaned skeptical, but the older I get, the more I wonder if science is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. Maybe some places hold onto things, people, memories, energies. I don't know, but I do know this. For a year of my life, I lived with something I couldn't quite explain, and his name was Pete. This happened when I was 17. Back then, I still lived at my childhood home, the kind of quiet suburban place where you know all the neighbors and the biggest threat to a teenager's night was getting caught sneaking out. That's exactly what I was doing one night, slipping out the back door to meet some friends down the road. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and I had done this more times than I could count. I had my escape route down to a science, but this night was different. As I eased the door shut behind me, I felt it immediately, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, stomach dropping as I turned, expecting to see my mom or sister standing there, about to bust me. But it wasn't them. Standing just outside the glow of the porch light was a figure monochrome, still and deeply wrong. At first I thought it was a trick of the dark. But no, she was real, or real enough. Her hair was jet black, so dark it almost seemed to absorb the light. Her face was featureless, covered in what looked like white and gray static. like a TV with no signal. And the dress she wore hovered somewhere between those two shades, as if color couldn't quite decide where it belonged on her. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at me with a faceless, unreadable stare. Panicked, I reached for the door behind me, heart hammering, and yanked it open, or tried to. As I went to pull it shut behind me again, it slammed faster than I expected, nearly catching my hand. I didn't look back. I tore through the backyard, vaulted the fence, and ran all the way to the street where my friend was waiting. I didn't even tell them what had happened. I just said I needed to crash at their place that night. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about her, that figure, that weird sense of presence that hadn't felt evil exactly, but deeply unsettling. The thing that stuck with me most wasn't even the image, though that haunted me too. It was the feeling, like I had walked into someone else's story, and she'd noticed. Not long after, another strange thing happened. One that pulled my mom into the mix. It was late, maybe a couple weeks later. My mom and I were up together watching a movie, something we did more often after my dad passed away. We didn't talk about it much, but I think we both found some comfort in just being together, even silently. After the movie ended, we went through the usual end-of-night routine. TV off, stereo receiver off, DVD player off, each with its own remote. The house settled into its quiet nighttime stillness, and we both headed off to bed. I had just started to drift off when I was snapped awake by an ear-splitting blast of static. The sound was coming from the living room. The speakers were turned up loud. I bolted out of bed and practically ran into my mom in the hallway. She'd been woken up too. We stood there, staring at each other, both of us confused, tired, and a little unnerved. The house was empty. No one else lived there, and yet somehow the TV had turned itself back on, but without an input, just blinding, flickering static across the screen, and that awful empty white noise. We shut it all off again, together this time. No explanations, no theories, just that same unspoken agreement to not dig too deep into something we didn't understand. Years passed. I went off to college, lived a normal life for the most part. It wasn't until I was about 23, back home visiting, that I finally told my family about the girl I saw that night. We were all sitting around the table, me, my mom, and my sister, and I just started telling the story, careful not to make it too dramatic. But I barely got halfway through when my sister suddenly jumped in. She finished my description. The black hair, the faceless look, the gray sundress. Like she'd seen it too. Then she told me something I'd never heard before. Back when she was younger, she and a friend used to see a little girl playing in the backyard, always in a sundress, always quiet. She said the girl looked to be around 12. We were stunned, all of us. My mom looked pale but not shocked, like some part of her had always known, had just never wanted to say it out loud. Later, we talked to our neighbor, the original owner of the house. She was an older woman, kind and straightforward. We mentioned the girl hesitantly, not wanting to sound crazy, but she didn't blink. "Oh," she said. "That must be the daughter from the first family that lived there. Sweet girl. She passed from leukemia, poor thing. Only child. The family moved out not long after. That locked something in for all of us. The sightings, the feelings, the sounds, they all clicked into place. It wasn't scary anymore, not in the same way. Felt like acknowledgement, like we hadn't imagined it. like someone really had been there all along. Even our dog had picked up on it. Back when I still lived there, he would sometimes just stop in the hallway and stare down toward my sister's room. His body stiff, the hair on his back raised. He'd growl low and deep, like he sensed something we couldn't see. It freaked me out every single time. I never connected it back then, but now, it all lines up. Looking back, I don't think she meant any harm. She didn't try to scare us. If anything, she felt lost or lonely, like she was still tethered to that house somehow, watching the world move on around her. I've never seen anything like her again. I don't know what she was, a ghost, a memory, something else entirely. But I believe what I saw, and so does my family. We don't talk about it often, but sometimes, when the topic of childhood homes comes up, someone will say, "Remember the girl in the sundress?" And we all just nod. Yeah, we remember. This one isn't mine exactly, it's secondhand. It belongs to my dad, but I've carried it with me for a long time, and it still moves me every time I think about it. Back when my sister and I were just little kids, our dad and stepmom had a setup that helped them stay connected even when their schedules didn't line up. For a while, they were both working opposite shifts. My dad was on nights and she worked days. The only real time they had together was in passing, so they got creative. They started using this old set of baby monitors they'd had since we were babies. Not just for monitoring, these ones could record short voice messages too. So they'd leave them out on the coffee table for each other. Small love notes, reminders, updates on the kids. Just a simple way to keep a presence in the house when the other person was away. That went on for a little while, maybe a few months, until eventually their shifts aligned again and the baby monitors were tucked back into storage, forgotten. Life went on until everything changed. My stepmom passed away from cancer not long after. She was young, too young. It hit us all hard, especially my dad. You could see how it knocked the wind out of him. They were close. Not just husband and wife, but truly each other's best friend. Losing her was like someone had pulled the floor out from under his world. The day of her funeral was a cold one, overcast, gray in a way that felt too fitting. Afterward, he came back home alone. The house must have felt impossibly quiet that night. Not just from the absence of noise, but the absence of her. He said he spent hours moving through the rooms, gently packing away her things, opening drawers slowly like they might breathe memories, folding clothes, going through jewelry boxes. He said he didn't cry, not really. It was like he was too stunned to feel anything at all, just moving on autopilot. At some point, maybe in a haze, he ended up pulling out one of those baby monitors. He hadn't even realized it was still tucked away in the back of a drawer. He set it on the coffee table, maybe out of habit, maybe out of instinct, and then went to bed. That's when the strange thing happened. He told me it was sometime after midnight when the monitor clicked on by itself and started playing a recorded message. An old one, long forgotten. Her voice, his wife's voice, over and over, it repeated, "I love you, Mike. I love you, Mike." Soft, warm, slightly muffled like an echo from another life. It wasn't just once or twice. It looped again and again until the batteries died. He didn't move, didn't try to stop it. He just sat there in the dark on the couch, listening to her voice fill the empty house. For the first time since the funeral, he said he finally let himself cry. Not just tears, but everything. The grief, the longing, the disbelief that she was really gone. It all came out in the dark with her voice playing like a lullaby he wasn't ready to stop hearing. He never told many people about that night. Just me later on when I was older. I think he was afraid people would think he imagined it or that it was just a glitch. But I believe him. There was something about the way he told it. No exaggeration, no drama. Just quiet truth. A few weeks after that, we came to stay with him for the weekend. My sister and I went inside the house while he stayed out on the porch to have a cigarette. It was early fall, the kind of evening where the sun is already down but the last warmth lingers in the air. He said that out of nowhere, a gust of wind came through, strong enough to rattle the wind chimes, and with it came the unmistakable scent of her perfume. He said it stopped him in his tracks. It was her, the way she smelled when she hugged you good morning, the scent that used to cling to her scarves. He just stood there, cigarette forgotten, eyes watering, not scared. Not anymore, just overwhelmed, like she was still watching, still saying goodbye in the only way she could. When I was a kid, those stories scared me. I didn't know what to make of them. A voice coming out of an old baby monitor in the middle of the night? A scent on the wind? It sounded like something from a ghost story, something you'd tell to spook your friends around a campfire. But the older I got, the more I saw the beauty in it. The peace. I don't think it was meant to frighten him, any of us. I think it was her way of saying, I'm still here. I'm okay. I love you. And maybe, in some way, she needed to say it as much as he needed to hear it. It's been years since she passed, and we don't talk about it all the time. But sometimes, when my dad mentions her, he gets this faraway look. He still keeps that baby monitor tucked in the top drawer of his nightstand. The batteries are long dead, but he never got rid of it. He told me once that he likes to think of her as checking in, just like they used to with the messages. And maybe that's what all of this really was. One last check-in. One last message left on the table, waiting to be heard. I love you, Mike. I love you, Mike. My grandfather was, by most accounts, not a good man. He was an alcoholic, prone to violence, and, on at least one occasion, tried to kill my grandmother in front of their children. It's hard to even wrap my head around the cruelty of that, especially knowing that it happened in front of people who would carry that memory with them for the rest of their lives. Some of the older members of my family speak about him with a strange kind of detachment, not out of forgiveness, but because there's simply too much pain there to carry openly. One of his less awful offenses, as my aunt once put it, was abandoning my grandmother with 6 young children, all under the age of 12. Just walked out one day and never really looked back. Even after he left, some of his children maintained minimal contact with him. The relationship was strained at best. My father didn't speak to him at all. Others, 2 of my aunts mostly, checked in every now and then, but more out of obligation than affection. He lived about 30 or 40 miles away from my grandmother and the children who had stayed local, tucked away in a small apartment and getting older, sicker, and, I imagine, lonelier. When he was in his 80s, his health took a sharp downturn. Eventually, he was hospitalized. No one expected a miraculous recovery, but when the call came, the one letting us know he'd passed away in the middle of the night, it still landed with weight. That morning, his oldest child, my Aunt Maria, volunteered to go to the hospital morgue to identify his body and complete the necessary paperwork. On her way there, she made a quick detour to stop at my grandmother's place. She figured it was best to break the news in person. What happened next has never quite left any of us. As Aunt Maria walked into my grandmother's small house, expecting to deliver news of a man's death, my grandmother looked up from her jigsaw puzzle and said, calmly, almost gently, "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." Now, you have to understand something about my grandmother. At that point in her life, she had started to show signs of cognitive decline. Nothing too extreme, but the usual things. Forgetting appointments, misplacing objects, occasionally talking about people as if they were still alive when they'd passed years ago. So a comment like that, out of nowhere, didn't exactly shock Aunt Maria. She figured someone had already called and informed her. Maybe one of the other siblings had gotten the news first and phoned Grandma before Maria arrived. That was the only explanation that made sense. So she let it go, said nothing, just gave her mother a hug, nodded gently, and then continued on her way to the morgue. When she arrived at the hospital and completed the necessary forms, the attending staff gave her a copy of the death certificate. There, printed in black and white, was the official time of death, 12:10 a.m. A chill passed over her. On her way back home, Maria stopped at our grandmother's again. She couldn't shake the moment. That strange comment, spoken so casually, and now matched perfectly by the timestamp on the death certificate. This time, she asked, "Mom, who called you this morning to tell you he passed away?" My grandmother looked up from her puzzle, blinked and said, "Nobody called." "Then why did you say you knew he died just past midnight?" Grandma's response? "Oh, he came to see me at 12:30 and we talked for a spell. He sat right there in that chair." She pointed toward the corner of the room, near the window. "He wanted to apologize for all he'd done to me and to you kids. Said he couldn't move on without saying he was sorry. I think he made his peace. So I'm glad for that." And then, as if she just commented on the weather or asked for more tea, she went back to humming softly and fitting another piece into the puzzle. Maria said she stood there for a while just watching her. There was no dramatic pause, no haunted look in her eyes. My grandmother had simply accepted it. This wasn't the first strange moment in her long life, and maybe she knew something we didn't. Maybe she'd seen too much already to question it. It would be easy to chalk the whole thing up to coincidence or senility or grief manifesting in strange ways. But that precise time, just past midnight, stuck with us all. And the detail about their conversation? That was never something my grandmother had previously wanted or expected from him. For decades, she had lived her life without apology, raising her children, building her own peace. But now, at the very end, maybe he needed to say it more than she needed to hear it. And maybe, just maybe, he was given the chance. Some people hear this story and get goosebumps. Others find it comforting. I was a kid when I first heard it, and it scared me a little. The idea of ghosts, of spirits visiting in the night. But now, older, I see it differently. It wasn't a ghost story. It was a closing. A man who had caused more pain than love, finally confronting what he'd done. A woman who had every right to hate him choosing to hear him out. And two lives, once deeply entwined, ending their final chapter with a kind of quiet understanding. She never brought it up again, and no one pressed her. But my aunt told me once, there was something in her face that day, not sadness, not relief, just stillness, like something had settled. Sometimes The most profound moments don't come with thunderclaps or flashing lights. They arrive in the middle of the night in silence, long after the damage is done, when there's nothing left but an apology and the space to let it land. And maybe that's all some souls really need in the end. Grief has a strange way of blurring the edges of reality. When you've lived long enough, seen enough heartbreak, and buried enough of the people you love, you begin to experience the world through a different filter. For my grandmother, that filter became even foggier after my father died. They had been incredibly close, not just mother and son, but best friends in a way that was rare and touching to witness. When he passed, something essential in her broke. Her already fragile heart began to fail her, and her memory, once sharp and stubborn, started to drift like smoke. After a few rough years, she was placed in a nursing home. It was a difficult decision, but necessary. Her dementia progressed quickly. Toward the end, she could usually remember who we were, though sometimes she'd call me by my father's name or confuse my cousin for one of her long-past siblings. If you came and sat with her for breakfast, talked, laughed, held her hand, by lunchtime she'd forgotten you were even there. So when we received the news that my Uncle Terry had died, we were careful. Terry was her middle son, the one who had always been a little bit wild, a little bit distant. He'd moved to the next state over years ago and mostly kept to himself. Still, his death was devastating, not only because of the loss, but because of how it happened. He'd taken his own life. The details were scarce, just enough to hurt, and we didn't know the full story yet. We only knew he was gone. We decided not to tell her right away. We waited a few days for a good morning, one of those rare days when she seemed more present, more herself. There was no telling how she'd process the information, or if she even could, but we owed her the truth. When that morning finally came, we gathered ourselves and made the drive to the nursing home. My aunt, my cousin, and I walked into her room, bracing for what we thought would be a very hard conversation. But before we could even start, before we could ask how she was feeling, or even offer her the juice we'd picked up from the diner down the road, she looked at us with eyes clearer than we'd seen in months and said, completely deadpan, "Well, I guess Jeff is the only one left now." Jeff is her youngest son, the last of her children still living. We froze. My cousin nearly dropped the juice. "What do you mean, Granny?" my aunt asked, trying to stay calm. "I mean, Terry's gone now," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. "Shot himself the other night." There was no ceremony in the way she said it. No sorrow, no confusion. Just a simple, tired truth. She wasn't asking. She wasn't guessing. She knew. None of us had told her anything yet. And as far as we knew, no one from the nursing home had either. There hadn't even been a full obituary yet. Just a few hurried phone calls between family and a lot of uncertainty. We asked her how she knew, and she sighed, looking off toward the window. "He called me," she said, "couple nights ago. Said he had just shot himself in the head. Wanted me to know. Said he was sorry." We just stared at her. Even with all her mental decline, there was a weight to her voice that made the hairs on my neck stand up. It wasn't until almost a month later, after the coroner's report was released and we spoke with the family friends who had found him, that we learned the official cause of death: suicide by gunshot to the head. And in that moment, her words came rushing back. So then we were left with a question. A whole tangle of them, actually. Was it possible he had really called her just after doing it? That thought chilled us to the bone. The idea that he was still conscious for some brief, horrifying moment, long enough to dial her number to speak, was almost too terrible to contemplate. But then we looked at our phone records. There had been no call. Not on her phone, not on his. Could it have been just before? Maybe he had called her to say goodbye, and her fractured mind had rearranged the timeline. That would be tragically sad and oddly beautiful, a final moment of connection before stepping off the edge. But even then, how would she have remembered? How would she have understood when she couldn't even remember breakfast? And this one sat with us the longest. Had he come to her somehow after the fact? We couldn't explain it, but it felt possible in a way that logic couldn't touch. The way she said it, not fearful, not confused, just certain. It left a mark. It felt less like the ravings of someone lost to dementia, and more like the calm voice of someone who had simply been visited. Maybe the world has thin places where the boundaries between here and there slip for just a moment. Maybe grief opens those doors. Maybe love does. Whatever the truth was, it left us changed. I've since come to think of that moment as a gift. A strange, eerie, bittersweet gift. Because for all her fading memory, that call, whether real or imagined, dream or spirit, stayed with her. It pierced through the fog of her mind, anchored by something deeper than recollection. Connection. It also made us reflect on Uncle Terry himself. Someone who kept his pain well hidden, who distanced himself but still found a way. Maybe the only way he could, to say goodbye to the woman who brought him into the world. And perhaps she gave him the peace he was looking for. In the quiet of her room, among puzzles and photos and half-finished cups of tea, maybe he found her waiting, as mothers often do, still listening. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of quiet that slips into your apartment when the rest of the world is busy. I was home alone, sitting on the couch in my living room, half watching a rerun of something I'd already seen too many times. The daylight filtered through the curtains, painting long, lazy shapes across the floor. There was nothing unusual about that day until there was. First, it was just a sound, a soft clinking like loose change in a pocket. But it was insistent, steady, and close. It sounded like someone was standing in the room with me, jingling coins in their hand, loud enough that it started to drown out the television. I thought maybe something had fallen behind the couch. I paused the TV. The sound kept going. Clink, clink, clink. I sat up. That's when a strange sort of pressure built in my chest. A deep, inexplicable knowing that something wasn't right. I walked slowly toward the source of the noise. It led me into the kitchen, and that's when I saw him. He was standing near the fridge, just there, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He wasn't hazy or ghost-like or floating. He was solid. Real. So real I could see the wear on his sneakers, the creases in the old hoodie he always wore on Sundays, the tiny shine of the quarter flipping between the fingers of his left hand. With his right, he was absently jingling a handful of loose change. He looked good. Not in the romantic way, those feelings had long since passed, but in the sense that he looked alive, like he had when I first met him. No signs of illness, no sadness in his eyes, Just a man casually standing in my kitchen. It was my ex-husband, the man who had been dead for 2 months. For a second, my brain struggled to catch up. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heart thudded in my ears. Then he turned. When his eyes met mine, his whole body froze. His expression changed instantly. His face shifted from casual to completely, utterly shocked. He tilted his head forward a little, squinting like he was trying to figure something out. His mouth parted in surprise. His eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. It was the look of someone who had just realized they'd been caught doing something they didn't think was possible. He was stunned that I could see him. I can't describe what that moment felt like. We just stared at each other. Two people caught between worlds, unsure what to do next. It wasn't scary. It wasn't sad. It was just real, familiar, heavy with meaning I didn't yet understand. And then, as life tends to do, reality broke the silence. My cat. She let out a yowl from the other room and started aggressively clawing the carpet. The sound shattered the moment, and without thinking, I turned to yell at her. Just a knee-jerk reaction. "Hey, knock it off." It took no more than 2 seconds to turn and call out. But when I turned back around, he was gone. Just like that. No puff of smoke. No fading into mist. He simply wasn't there anymore. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen for a long time. The silence buzzed in my ears. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to tell myself it had been a daydream, a trick of the light, some kind of hallucination. But the sound of the coins, the look on his face, the way my stomach dropped when we locked eyes, it was all too real. I knew what I had seen. He had died just 2 months prior. It had been sudden. Car accident, late at night, no one else involved. We hadn't spoken much in the last couple years, but when you've shared part of your life with someone, you never really let go. His death hit me harder than I expected. Maybe not with the grief of losing a partner, but with the cold, sharp sadness of losing someone who once knew you completely. A few days after the encounter, I confided in a couple coworkers, older Romanian women who had always been kind to me. When I told them what happened, their eyes got wide, but they didn't look surprised. One of them said, "Yes, that makes sense. The dead stay close for about 3 months after they pass. They linger, finish unfinished business, visit the people they loved. After that, they cross over." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't a deeply religious person. I wasn't sure where I stood on the spiritual side of things. But her words stayed with me. I think about that day more often than I probably should. Not because I'm scared. Not because I miss him, though maybe part of me does. I think about it because it reminds me that life, this life we're all living, isn't as cut and dry as we'd like to believe. Maybe the dead don't leave immediately. Maybe love or regret or curiosity can tether them here just a little while longer. And maybe, just maybe, some of them get the chance to look around one last time, to see the people they once held close, to stand in a familiar kitchen, jingling change the way they always used to, and remember who they were. Maybe he wasn't ready to go just yet, or maybe he just wanted to be seen one more time. You've made it through the hour. The stories are over now, and the night is quiet again. Let the silence soothe you. Whatever followed you from the tales, leave it here. You're safe. You're calm, and you're already drifting deeper into rest. If you enjoyed these stories, consider subscribing to Dark Reddit for more nightly chills. Until next time, sleep well.